two speakers from CyberX. It's an unusual terminology, I suppose. It's not something we come across every day, CyberX. So CyberX is Australia's leading cyber security provider based in Melbourne, with a presence across Australia, New Zealand, United States and the United Kingdom, so pretty worldwide. They work with a range of private firms as well as federal, state, territory and local governments to keep Australians safe from cyber security threats. So we've got Grant Walsh and Dr. William Stoltz. Grant is the Director of CyberX Strategy and Consulting Practice with an over a decade of previous experience working in telecommunications and national security policy in the federal government, including a senior advisor to the Minister for Communications. That'd be a pretty thrilling task, I reckon. Dr. William Stoltz is Senior Manager also in CyberX Strategy and Consulting Practice, with previous experience servicing across Australia's defence, intelligence and law enforcement communities. He's also a lecturer and expert associate at the ANU National Security College. So boy, have these guys got some experience. Do you guys live locally?
South Yarra.
Down up the road. No, I'm talking about Morris. So welcome, gentlemen. We look forward to your presentation.
Right. So Daniel gave us a good rundown before of some of the threat actors, so I'll power through this, but I wanted to give you a sense of the wider environment that is generating these scams and cybersecurity threats. So the cyber domain is essentially being supercharged by new technologies, which is making it an arena for state competition, and that includes cyber warfare, for espionage and for extortion. Now, tonight we're really talking about the extortion end of the spectrum, but it's all kind of part of the same mix of malicious activity that's happening online. So cyber attacks and digital disinformation campaigns are now part of how states compete with each other. It's also a massive area for huge profits by organised criminal groups. And the trouble is that these two groups of state and non-state actors are actually converging with one another. So there are kind of three broad categories of malicious actors, as I mentioned: states, organised criminals and insiders. And the reality is they all have slightly different motivations. States are obviously competing with each other and trying to gain intelligence and or sabotaging and disrupting other states. Organised criminals are seeking to gain profit either through extortion or theft of data or to compromise a system. Then you have insiders, and that can include malicious insiders within an organisation, but also unwitting actors. So someone who, as I talked about before, accidentally clicks on a malicious link within a company or something like that. We talked about the impact of cybercrime before. Jeff was mentioning the cost of scams alone being $3.1 billion, but we've also got cybercrime to individuals being about $3.5 billion, and the overall estimate of the impact of cybercrime to Australia at large is a bit unknown, but it's hovering probably around $30 billion, which is a pretty, I guess, an enormous number. And based on what we understand, there are about 76,000 incidents a year, but that is only what is reported. And the reality is a lot of cybercrime is underreported, unfortunately. There's some statistics up there as well, just to give you a sense of some of the relative cost. I think it's interesting to note that the financial losses for a lot of cyber incidents are actually not that high, and that's a deliberate technique by organised criminal groups, is that they actually want to make the price something palatable for people to pay, and a lot of the time they will do intelligence collection on organisations to get a sense of what organisations might be willing to pay if they are extorted. So what are the policy responses that governments are currently undertaking at the moment? We have a real emphasis on encouraging businesses to report cybercrime. That includes creating mandatory obligations to do so. We also have new measures being explored to force organisations to block malicious traffic, detect it and block it, which comes at a cost to business, of course, but this is about pushing on to organisations to provide for the security of their own customers. And we also have the exploration of new powers for law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies to actually actively disrupt the threat actors themselves, which we call digital disruption, and that involves sometimes actually deploying our own malware on those organisations. So the Minister for Home Affairs recently referred to that as hacking the hackers. So moving from a defensive approach to actually becoming offensive as well. So I'll hand over to Grant now to discuss what you can do to respond to these.
Thank you, Lily. Good evening, my name's Grant. Thank you very much for having... thank you very much for having us. Should I say, like, the way that you opened us off is exactly where we need to be, is that don't be sitting ducks, and knowledge is power. And even that knowledge exchange from young Daniel is super valuable. So I'm so excited to be here this evening. If you take nothing away from me this evening or will, there's just three things, and you're going to hear a lot of different bits and pieces come through, and I hope you pick up more bits of advice, and I'll send some safe links across that will direct you to get more info. But if you take nothing else away, I want you to remember three things out of this evening. And the first is make yourself a harder target. And what does that look like? And we've touched on a lot of good points already. It is think about the information you're sharing. Don't be paranoid, don't be cloistered, live your life, but you need to be conscious about making yourself a harder target and understand the information you're putting out there. And the very simple, I've yet to find a better word, but cyber hygiene of not reusing passwords. To all those things that we get told, but we're all guilty of not doing them, it is like consistently demonstrating good hygiene makes you a harder target. So that's my first point. My second point, stop and verify or ignore. We like to think of ourselves as larrikin, Ned Kelly descendants who don't follow the rules, and we're a bit, off the cuff. We are rule followers. We all do it. We're rule followers. We line up. We pay our taxes. We follow government. What is good is that we have a good trust in our institutions and our government. That's exploited by scammers, because when you get the linked toll message, I should pay that because I do follow the rules. What I want you to understand is when something comes in on your mobile phone that you have not initiated, you're in charge, and you can ignore it. No institution, no bank, no government agency can take an action, don't quote me on that, will take an action via a text message and a text message alone. So stop, and you are in control, and you can ignore it, would be my second point. And the third point, and it's been touched on already, is ask for help. You can be angry, you can be upset, and it is upsetting, but don't be embarrassed. These things move at a velocity that is hard for a single person to get their hands around, and you will need someone you trust, whether that be kids, someone from church, someone from Neighbourhood Watch, someone that you trust to help you, because there's going to be lots to do to respond, and you need to help to prioritise what that is, otherwise you could be putting your effort in the wrong direction. So if you take nothing else away, just those 3 points. In cyber incidents, major cyber incidents that we respond to, and the Australian Signals Directorate, other cybersecurity firms, we have an incident response framework or process. It's multifaceted and it's different phases. What I want to unpack for you tonight is a subset of that, about thinking about your own scam response process that starts from protect and moves through to detect, recover, and then learn. So I want to unpack a bit of our own kind of shorter process. I will need to read some of this. So on the left, we've got prepare and detect, and so we've touched on, I want you to make yourself a harder target and know what to look for. We're going to move across into, if something has happened, how do we contain, and we use the word eradicate or evict in an incident, which means how do I stop the bleeding, but then stop that actor being able to keep, we call it persistence in cybersecurity, keep a foothold in a network, but in your case, in your accounts, in your life. And then finally, how do we recover and learn from our experience and bring that back, like a good consultant, I've got a flowchart, and then rethink about that preparation again, so we're always learning. The first part, and we've touched on a lot of good points already, is minimise the information that you put out online, and stay in control of not only what you give, but who can see it. And I'll show a screen in a second about what I mean there. And if you're interacting with a platform, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you have the option to set permissions, start them as low as they'll go. You can always increase them, but start the permissions of what people can see about you as low as they will go, and then move up from there and be conscious rather than say, permit everything, see my email, see my surname, see my mobile phone number. Start low and move up. We talked about not using rote passwords, and wherever possible, and you'll see this acronym a lot, MFA or two-factor authentication. I'll unpack what that means in a second as well, but any online account, whether it's your Gmail, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Facebook, that has two-factor authentication and the option to turn it on, turn it on. And we'll unpack two of those things. See in here, lots of moving parts, right? This is Facebook on the left, LinkedIn on the right. And what you've got is here is right deep in the settings. And you've got to go looking for this, but if you have a look, okay, use two-factor, turn it on. Get alerts about unrecognised logins. To the really good point that was made earlier, keep an eye on your credit card statements or on your online banking. If you've got the option to turn on alerts about unauthorised activity on your account, I probably want that on. On LinkedIn, maybe I don't want the general public, if you look at the top red box, to see my email address. So, unfortunately, these things are buried right down in the settings. There's a link at the end, and I'll share it, which is a guide to kind of go through and where do I look for these things and how do I dial them back, because unsurprisingly, a lot of the time the platforms will say, I want them up to 11 from the start. A password manager. It's not an ad, I don't get paid by LastPass. A password manager is something to think about, and again, I'll put a link about some info, how we can avoid, it introduces that discipline about not reusing passwords and making them really tricky, but they're hard, obviously, to remember. What a password manager does is manage all your passwords in a single safe vault and then deploys them only when you want. LastPass is a paid one. Google offers a free one that's actually pretty good and had a lot of improvements in recent times. Just something to think about that hygiene of passwords. This is that MFA, multi-factor or two-factor. So everybody's probably seen this on the left. I get a one-time code from my bank or from MyGov. People might have seen these tokens. If you're working from home, these are what they used to look like to log in. Or nowadays, there's actually an app on your phone that gives you the same number. But basically, what multi-factor is at least two, but ideally 3 steps before someone can log into your account. Something you know, a PIN code, something you have, your phone, or that two-factor. Nowadays, something about you, which is a whole other discussion, biometrics, face scans. Something else, and I'll put a link about how to use two-factor, because if you can turn that on for your account, turn it on. I think we all, but then how do we detect? How do we know what to look for? I think we're all pretty savvy now at spotting these things, so I won't labour on this. You all would have seen these types of scams. This one's COVID, MyGov, linked is a classic. What I want to give you is just think about the methodology of a scammer. I want to start from a position of authority or trust, so I'll emulate a MyGov, an ATO, or an authority. I want to give you something that's personal about you, or at least personable enough, like I was driving through a toll road, and so that makes sense as to why I got it, because remember, if you didn't initiate it, ignore it. So they want to get you to the next part, which is a call to action, or a sense of consequence or sanctions, and then rely on that rule-following concept I talked about. And that is the very deliberate, targeted way that they're pulling you through from, I didn't start this, to now I'm actually engaging with it. So more than just look for the dodgy links, because we're good at that, think about the context of how, because these things happen with it, as Will said, with intent. And these are more examples, and the reason I put these up is to show you that increasingly, unfortunately, what we're seeing is the ability of a caller to jump in and what we call overstand. So you'll see ANZ, Ozpost, they're actually able to drop into your phone will group up messages that look alike, and you trust that your phone groups them together. They're relying on that now. So unfortunately, that means another level of diligence. And to that last point, the why. Why am I getting this, and how is this working? If something happens, contain and eradicate. It's easy to be pulled in multiple directions about what do I do first. First thing, even before you report it later, put your hand up, ask for help, because we're going to need help in getting our hands around this. There are 3 key things that, of all the things, people's default goes, I need to go to my driver's license, my passport, they are long burn. And to Will's point, most scams are small chunks of money rapidly they can get. The three things that I want you to focus on if something happens are your primary email account, that's your Gmail, if it's your webmail, it's your Outlook for work. Second is your phone. And then the third is your financial institution. The reason for that, of all three things, they interlock. Your email account is how you reset your online banking password when we inevitably all forget it. Your phone is by proxy an ID device that gets that two-factor code. If a scammer can get your phone number, they can re-establish a presence on your account. And then your bank is at the fulcrum of both of those. So focus on those three things first. And get somebody you trust to help you get around that. That means re-secure, reset the password on your primary email, contact your financial institution, put a freeze on the account, ask them for assistance, contact your telecommunications provider and say, I think my phone's been ported, someone's trying to steal my number and take my phone number so they get the two-factor. Of three things, they would be the three to focus on. From then, I want you to get a piece of paper, or a piece of wrapping paper, a piece of butcher's paper, or write on the fridge, because cybersecurity incidents are fought with whiteboard markers. When we're in an incident, the first thing I do is big whiteboard, how are we mapping this out? And what I want you to do is very simple. This is a very boring table that my young consultants would get angry at before, but I want you to start on my left and think about what information do I think has gone out? Write it down. What online accounts do I have? Write them down. What do those accounts link to? And then what do they know about me? It's only when you start to get your head around what that looks like, what the interconnections are, that we can start to actually wrap around this in its entirety and then have a plan to move through. It's then that we get to that recover and learn phase. So it's then that we can actually think about, do I need to reissue my driver's license, reissue my passport, these next order consequences? Because if you remember back at the start, we contacted our financial institution, so that's locked down. Now I can think about, are they going to go to my financial institution, open another credit card? Well, no, I've dealt with that. Those things are slower burn. This is the long-term recovery. And then thinking about how do I learn from this and avoid it happening again. And a massive takeaway from this is that last little under-considered dot point there, which is really consider your mental health and your family's mental health. I cannot stress to you, and to that point that was made earlier, it is an incredibly upsetting thing to happen, and the sense of guilt and embarrassment that you feel, that is not justified because it's not your fault, but know that you need to address that and don't do it alone, because I've seen people, entire families, very badly upset by what young Daniel very eloquently articulated was an honest mistake. So really I want you to think about your mental health and your family's mental health and well-being. That was a whirlwind run through our own little scams response cycle. I hope that was of use. Here are some links I'll send through that kind of unpack all the things I talked about there. And in this case, please click the link, which the cybersecurity professional just told you to do, because these are great resources to navigate some of the more tricky parts that we can't unpack tonight. But thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to chat later as well.